Hello, my name is Rhonda Kohnle, and this is my presentation over the legal rights and responsibilities in special education. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is a little bit of the history of how education evolved in the United States. Then we will talk about exceptional children. Who are they and where are they? And lastly, we'll speak about the laws that have changed the face of education in the United States. During the colonial period, education was only for the elite. It was private education paid for by the parents, and the majority of the people were illiterate. In early America, they decided that states would pay for education, and it would be public education. This was also only for white male children. However, some of the schools decided to charge fees for the children to go to school, and that made it to where only the rich kids got to go to school. Later on in the Common School movement, which came about during Andrew Jackson's presidency, the states continued to fund schools. The education was segregated, and they were able to reach about 50% of students to get an education. The rest of them stayed home. During this time, they also improved several things about the education. They came up with a system of grade levels. They improved the education of the teachers. And they also started educating girls and other students that were in segregated schools. As we look at education for all, which is what we have today, each one of these groups has their own story of how they became part of the all in education for all. Girls were originally excluded, then more and more started coming into schools, then they were just excluded from activities. Eventually, in 1972, they were allowed to be involved in after-school activities legally. And Native Americans, on the other hand, they were not citizens of the United States until after World War I, and they were not allowed to attend public schools. Most of them were taken to boarding schools where they lived sometimes for years without ever seeing their parents, and they were normally far from home. Spanish speakers were just as African Americans put in their own schools, segregated from white children in white schools. And Asian Americans have an interesting story because originally in California, they were allowed in the schools with the whites. And as the population increased, so did the discrimination. Eventually, they were told they had to leave the schools and go to their own schools. Gandhi said it this way. He said, "The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members." In the United States, for long periods, we've ignored the most vulnerable members of our country. So we're going to look at who those people are today. Today, we have special education. Special education is education that is designed specifically to meet the needs of an exceptional child. So now we look at who is an exceptional child. An exceptional child has some sort of disability that affects their daily lives. This could be inability to see. It could be a speech impediment. It could be a physical ailment, or it could be a specific learning disability in one area, such as reading. These children are all different. They're all varied areas as far as severity of their disability, and they are all included in the Education for All. There are approximately 6 million students that are exceptional, that are enrolled in public education today. These students are everywhere. Around the world, there are about 200 million students. But here in the United States, in the public school system, we are serving 6 million. One thing that's important to remember is these students are just students. They have the same needs as every other student walking down the hall in your school. They want to make friends. They want to feel like they can do something, like they have a value. And they are there because they want an education and they want a future to look forward to. Now we're going to look at some of the court cases that have brought us where we are today. And we're going to try to go in chronological order. So I decided to start with Plessy versus Ferguson. And in 1896, the court determined that separate was equal. And as you can see with the photograph, separate was definitely not equal, but at that time in history, that's what they determined. One story I thought was important to share was that in 1919, Beatty versus the Board of Education, Merritt Beatty's parents wanted him put in the general education class. And he was a definitely an exceptional child. He had a hard time controlling his face, as far as he would just kind of make faces, and sometimes he would drool. At that time, the court determined that it was too much of a detriment to the other students in the class and the teacher, a distraction for the teacher, to have him in the room with them. But he was on grade level. He kept up with the other kids. He had no accommodations and no special assistance or anything else, but he was learning, and they still decided to take him out of the room. In 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that separate was not equal. And so this was an important case not only for segregation of children on the basis of race, but also segregation of children on the basis of physical and intellectual disability. So this case ended up being stretched from its original intention and being used by parents to be able to keep their children in public schools. Park versus the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 1972. Park was the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children. It was parents trying to protect their children and provide them with an education. The court decided that the state of Pennsylvania had to provide a free and appropriate education for all students. So it's a very important decision, but then again, it only applied to Pennsylvania. There was no national law at the time that protected the children. Around the same time, Mills versus the District of Columbia Board of Education in 1972. This case came up, and it was parents in the District of Columbia whose students were being excluded from school and from school activities. And the schools claimed that they didn't have enough money coming in to be able to take care of these children. And the court decided that lack of funds was not an excuse for the school to not serve disabled students. So they determined that in the District of Columbia, the schools had to provide a free and suitable education. It seems that during this time, there was already a new day dawning for special education. President Kennedy had already convened a panel on mental retardation. His sister Eunice Kennedy Shriver also started the Special Olympics in 1968. Their sister was mentally handicapped, and so they had a personal reason to become involved and concerned with the treatment of children in special education. By 1975, Public Law 94-142 was signed in by President Gerald Ford. It was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We call this act IDEA for short, and it has become known as the Bill of Rights for special education students. Exceptional students have specific rights through this act, and we're going to discuss each one of them. Free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, least restrictive environment, or LRE, individualized education program, or IEP, procedural due process, non-discriminatory assessment, and parental participation are all parts of IDEA. Free, appropriate public education means that all children have a free education provided for them by the public school system through the state. And this also includes any related services that are necessary for the child. They may need physical therapy, or they may need speech therapy. These things, even social work, can be put in place through the school for the benefit of the child. Least restrictive environment means that children that have the ability to function and learn to reach their goals in the traditional general classroom will be able to do that with the assistance of accommodations and whatever they need that can lead them to success in that classroom. Their IEPs dictate what accommodations they'll receive and what their learning goals are. And if they can accomplish those things, there's no reason to isolate them in a separate classroom. The students will be integrated as much as possible. So if they need 45 minutes a day in a special education or resource room, then that's what they'll get, and they won't be taken out for hours at a time from their peers. This law, or this part of the law, prevents cases like the Beatty case, in which I mentioned before, Merritt Beatty faced various injustices because of his disability. An IEP, or individual education program, is set up for each student, and the accommodations on the IEP and the goals and everything that's there is for that student. The IEPs should never be the same from one student to the next because all of them are different. So they're program should also be different. Procedural due process means that the parents are going to be notified of the meetings, and they will be notified in their own language. The parents have a right to attend meetings, and they have a right to be heard as a part of the meeting, just as the other professionals at the meeting are heard. And also, if the parents have a disagreement with a classification or anything else that goes on at the meetings, they can request a hearing. They can have legal counsel. They have quite a bit of rights to be able to be a part of the decision-making process in their child's education. Non-discriminatory assessment means that children are going to be tested and assessed for a disability in their own language. The tests should not be biased by gender, race, religion, or anything else, so that we can get the best grade the student is capable of. Parental participation means that the parents can come to the meetings. They can call the teacher and talk to her or him. In the meantime, they can have a say-so as to whether or not their child is getting enough services, whether it needs to be cut back, whether they believe that the child's going to benefit from more time in the special ed room or less time. They have the ability to give the team insight that no one else has because they've had the child their whole life. The No Child Left Behind law passed in 2002. It was signed in by President George Bush, and it increased the accountability for schools, giving schools grades based off of the students' grades and classes that are available, different categories like that. It also gave students the Common Core standards or common standards that applied to all states, which is what the testing is based off of. And one of the third things that it did was it gave parents more choice when it came to schools. So if a school doesn't make the grade, parents can choose to move their children to a different school whenever open enrollment time comes. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, it states that a person who has a mental or physical impairment is anyone that has a limit in a major life activity, that those people are disabled. And the people that are disabled are protected for being involved with anything that receives federal funding. So whether it's housing that's federally funded, or whether it's a YMCA program, or anything else that's federally funded, they cannot be discriminated against. And this goes beyond students. It doesn't matter how old or how young they are. They can use this to be able to participate in those activities. ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It protects against discrimination, including getting jobs for people with disabilities. It makes public transportation possible. It guarantees access to some facilities, including public and some corporate facilities for people who are handicapped. It also enables people to go into public places with service animals. I believe that all of that put together shows that it takes parents and teachers and students working together to create successful students. The uh, we can't do it just one or two of us. We have to all three parts be working together with the professionals, with the other people in the children's lives, with the assisting faculty. We have to be able to all work together to be able to put the child first and be able to get them everything that they need so that they can be as successful as possible. The bottom line for parents, as far as their rights and responsibilities go, are parents are the advocate for the child. They have them at home, they provide for them, love and nurture them, and they need to do their best to become educated, which the teacher can help with, but they need to become educated about the child's condition so that they can advocate for the child properly. They can participate in the IEP meetings. They can support teachers and professionals at home while they're working through different issues with the child, different lessons and things. They can be supportive. And any concerns that they have about the child's development or education, emotional, anything, they can communicate those with the parents or with the teachers. Teacher's job: communicate, communicate, communicate. The teachers are the in between. They communicate with the parents as to IEP meetings, progress, concern areas. They give the parents the opportunity to have the children tested. They determine if the child is at risk. And they also give the parents their rights so that the parents are informed as to what their rights are. Teachers provide uh, opportunity for growth and development of each student that's in their care. They can provide accommodations to students, whether they're already on an IEP or not. They can start that process and maybe get the student a step ahead. Their job is to make the student successful. And whatever the skill level of the student or the ability level, we want to get them to the highest achievement possible. Uh, Teachers communicate needs or concerns with general education teachers. They have to communicate what's on that IEP because a lot of times the general ed teachers, if there's too many of them, they can't come to the meeting or whatever. They have to be able to say, this is what Sally needs to be successful. And so this is what we're going to do for her in the classroom. They also have to be able to communicate with the teachers about what students are falling behind and possibility of why, and do they think they need to be assessed and given a referral. The teachers also ensure that each student with a disability has an IEP, that they receive the related services necessary. So if they need speech or physical therapy, occupational therapy, whatever it is, that those things are provided for the students. They also need to make sure that when the teacher notifies parents, whether it's the general teacher or the special education teacher, that the communication is on level so that if parents don't understand, whether it's because the parents' English is not their first language, or whether the parents have a difficulty with reading or communicating. The teacher's job is to make sure that they understand what's going on with the student. Teachers have to be the ultimate go-between between the administration, the general education teachers and the parents, and the other professionals that are involved with the student. So They just have to keep that communication line going constantly. Students. Everything is about the students. Um, Students need to listen to all of the people that are in their lives trying to help them, and they need to do their best with whatever tasks are put in front of them, whether it's an assessment or whether it's just a general assignment. Students need to communicate with adults because many times, if students don't tell adults they're having trouble here or there, or this looks a certain way or that doesn't sound right, then we don't know. And if they can communicate with us, we can give them the accommodations that they need. The other thing that students can do, especially as they grow older, the parents will want them in IEP meetings, and the teachers will want to have their voice heard. And even as they get older, there'll be transition services, and the students need to understand what's happening and what goals they have to look forward to and where they need to be putting their energy to be able to progress. So, in conclusion, we've come a long way. We have gone from only having white male students in the classroom to guaranteeing that everyone gets a free and appropriate public education. So we still have some things to work out. There are some kinks, and we need to do our best to be able to move forward and continue to serve the families and children that are in our care the best of our ability. Also, there are still families who are unaware of their rights. And like I said, it could be because our information is not in their first language. Or it could be because they have a disability themselves. Another thing that we need to do is we need to expose children to new and different ways of thinking and new and different experiences. Special education children have a different outlook on themselves and others, and we need to appreciate that. We need to encourage parents and professionals to remember that we're all here for the kids. That's the reason that we do what we do is for the children. It's not for any other reason other than to help the children be successful and to become productive members of society in however their abilities enable that. How will this information affect my class? Well, the first thing that I want to be able to do is listen. I want to listen to my students and I want to listen to their families. I want to understand where they come from and how they feel about disabilities, how they feel about their future, and I want to encourage them. I want to encourage them to learn their rights, to take advantage of the services that are available for them, to be able to help them to reach uh, the the goals that they set for themselves. And maybe they will be able to go a little bit beyond that even. I want to be able to communicate effectively with general education teachers and other professionals involved in the students' lives. I also want to incorporate as many different learning styles in my teaching as possible. Um, I like to be creative, and so I think being creative and finding uh, effective accommodations for students will be something that I can be successful at, and I can help them be successful through that. The other thing that I would like to do is to research new ways to help the children, to uh, stretch their experiences and to help them within the learning environment be able to be successful. My philosophy for teaching is that all students can learn And as a teacher, it's my responsibility to present information in a way that they can retain it. So a lot of that to me is through different styles of presentation, through uh, all the different senses, being able to do experiments, act out stories, being able to use the scientific method and things so that they can remember it, so they create a connection. Students are individuals, each one with their own knowledge, culture, and interests. Their abilities are going to be different, and each one is going to learn differently. All types of people, races, cultures, and socioeconomic statuses should be honored. And in doing this, I think that we can show them new ways of thinking and stretch their experiences so that they realize other possibilities. This can be done through the curriculum, through reading, through the classroom setting, even, and just through encouragement. Students should be shown respect as human beings. They should be allowed to express themselves, their opinions, and never be made feel bad because of their opinions. Students and their families should feel comfortable in communicating with the teachers and the administration. And, we all have to remember that we're here for the kids, that we want the kids to reach their highest potential and to become productive members of the community and society in whatever ways their abilities lend that. These are the references I used, and there's my special education textbook, my introduction to teaching textbook, a video from Dr. Guliani, and a paper called Getting the Story Straight, Allowing Different Voices to Tell an Effective History of Special Education Law in the United States.